When I first meet with people who are looking to get help getting clean and sober, whether they need treatment, counseling, or they're trying to learn about 12-step programs, they usually say things like, "I'm done. I'm sick of feeling like this. I will do anything." Amazingly, within a couple of days, they're saying things like, "I'm too busy to go to all those meetings. AA is too religious. I went to a meeting and I didn't like it. I didn't have time to do my homework. I don't like my sponsor. I went to a bar, but I didn't drink. I'm a cocaine addict, so alcohol isn't my problem. And my personal favorite, why can't I hang out with him or her? We're just friends." And if I had $1 for every time I heard that one, and then found myself helping somebody recover from the aftermath of a relapse, well, I'd have a lot of dollars. What happens is they forget the desperation they had when we first met. When they said, "I want what you have and I'm willing to go to any length to get it, except that, and that, oh, and that, and that." If you hear yourself saying any of those things out loud or in your head, your addict or alcoholic is driving the bus again. Nowhere in our 12-step programs is the resistance greater or are the excuses more numerous than when it comes to doing our step 5. Yet no step is as essential to the fundamental change of personality required to overcome alcoholism or drug addiction. Even though in step 4, we admitted the exact nature of our wrongs, the process of clearing away the wreckage of our past needs the necessary process of sharing those wrongs with another person in step 5. While working step 5, the repetition of the same type of situations and patterns of behavior reveal themselves. We begin to focus attention on what is behind the patterns of our addiction and the reasons we act out in the ways that we do. This is a great point in recovery when we can start calling those patterns and behaviors character defects. Our destructive behaviors usually reflect underlying character defects, which are the engine that drives most of our unhealthy actions. Why do we do a 5th step? Well, we do it because there are certain damaging memories or beliefs that can only live in the dark, and shining a light on them can get rid of them forever. An alcoholic or addict lives a life worthy of an Oscar award most of the time. More so than most people, we are actors who present the character to the outside world that we want others to see. After completing step 5, we no longer need to do this. Once we have completed this step, we are able to look at the world in the eye, let our fears fall away, and feel more at peace. And the weight of living that double life is lifted. Here is part of what the Big Book has to say about step 5. It says, "We'll be more reconciled to discussing ourselves with another person when we see good reasons why we should do so. The best reason first. If we skip this vital step, we may not overcome drinking. Time after time, newcomers have tried to keep to themselves certain facts about their lives. Trying to avoid this humbling experience, they have turned to easier methods. Almost invariably, they got drunk. Having persevered with the rest of the program, they wondered why they fell. We think the reason is that they never completed their house cleaning. They took inventory all right, but hung on to some of the worst items in stock. They only thought they had lost their egoism and fear. They only thought they had humbled themselves. But they had not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary until they told someone else all their life story. And that's from the Big Book of AA, pages 72 and 73. That short reading says a lot. First, it tells us that we're likely to relapse if we take shortcuts or avoid this step. And that's a pretty in-your-face statement. Then it goes on to tell us about the mind of an alcoholic or addict when it says, having persevered with the rest of the program, they wondered why they fell. They did most of what was suggested, but can't figure out why they relapsed. They modified the program because they thought they were different. They let shame and ego get in the way. They forgot about the desperation that they had when they first came into the program, when they said they were willing to go to any length to achieve sobriety. Now, the next thing I noticed about this reading is that it mentions humility 3 times. I'm often asked what the most important character traits are if you want to achieve sobriety and maintain sobriety. And my response is honesty and humility. If you look at the first paragraph of how it works, it mentions honesty 3 times. And now in this important step, the Big Book mentions humility 3 times. If you recall, 2 weeks ago, I mentioned the need to break out of shame in this phase of our program, and that the gift of shame is humility. When we are able to shine the light on the shame we are carrying, as we do in step 4, and we become vulnerable, we'll be ready to be humbled and to do a proper step 5. Note too this line, but they had not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary until they told someone else all their story. In this line, it mentions fearlessness. In step 4, we're told to take a fearless and searching moral inventory. As with all the steps, if we stumble, don't do them, or take shortcuts, we need to go back to the previous step. For example, if we leave something out of our step 5, hold something back, or avoid doing it, we haven't been fearless, and we haven't properly done our step 4. We need to go back to it. If we haven't done a fearless and searching moral inventory in step 4, we need to go back to step 3, because if we truly trusted our higher power, we would be able to be fearless, because we know that He would get us through it. If we haven't given our will and lives up completely as we agreed to in step 3, then we haven't come to believe that we need the help of a power greater than ourselves, and we need to go back to step 2. If we haven't come to believe that we need a power greater than ourselves, or if we've relapsed, we need to go all the way back to step 1. How we measure our actions and our lives will often determine the kind of problems that we'll uncover. If we use faulty tools and guidelines, we can't make accurate assessments. We may find that we aren't progressing in our recovery program. It may be that we need to look at the measuring devices we are using to uncover our problem areas. In our scripture tonight, God in a vision showed Amos a measuring device to illustrate how He was going to measure His people. The device is a simple plumb line. So can I have the scripture up there, please? Our scripture tonight is from the Old Testament, book of Amos, chapter 7, verses 7 and 8. In this passage, Amos is recalling the third of three visions that God brought to him, and God was explaining to Amos that he was disappointed in the conduct of his people. The scripture says, "Then he showed me another vision. I saw the Lord standing beside a wall that had been built using a plumb line. He was using a plumb line to see if it was still straight. And the Lord said to me, 'Amos, what do you see?' I answered, 'A plumb line.' And the Lord replied, 'I will test my people with this plumb line. I will no longer ignore their sins.'" So how many of you, just a show of hands, know what a plumb line is? Oh, quite a few of you. So for those of you who don't, I have created one, a very simple one. There's only three things that are required to have a plumb line. One is manual dexterity, apparently. You need a string, a weight, and gravity. So this is an ancient measuring tool that people use when they're building structures to hold up against the wall of something to see if it was straight. Can everybody see that? I'm going to show you another illustration of a plumb line. Can I have the first slide, please? Should I have the second slide? Or are we done for tonight? No slides? Okay. Well, this makes it a little tougher. My second slide was of a famous landmark, the Leaning Tower of Pisa. So many of you have seen that. Many of you know what it is. And when we are drinking and using, we're a lot like the Leaning Tower of Pisa in more than one way. But we aren't living an upright and righteous life. Our foundation wasn't well established, and our behaviors reflect this. In step 4, we examine those behaviors, and in step 5, we confess them. Then we have started on a path to begin living the way our higher power wants us to live. Upright in our responsibilities to ourselves and to our fellow man. God came to Amos in a vision and is using the example of a plumb line to show Amos that he is expecting his people to live in an upright manner. In Amos's day, Israel was a prosperous nation, but with their prosperity, they had become corrupt. They were not treating their poor and helpless very well, and they were turning away from or abandoning their religious beliefs. They had forgotten where they came from. They had forgotten that they came from slavery, and we, in like manner, have come from a place of slavery. The Israelites had been given a new life, a new beginning, and had gone back to their old ways. What does that sound like? A relapse. We are given a new life, turn back on our old behaviors because we're not using the proper measuring devices, and when we do that, we relapse. Step 5 is a new beginning for us, a turning point where, after examining our own behaviors, we can confess them and turn to a new way of living. If we don't, like the big book tells us, and like the book of Amos shows us, we will relapse. In Amos's vision, God was using the plumb line to show us how he wants us to live. How should we measure ourselves? Well, I see a good many people who have done a step 5 and maybe even worked through the rest of the program, say how good their recovery program is, how many meetings they're getting to, how amazing the program is, and they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. They fall back into their old ways. I pass them in the back alley after meetings, and I hear them complaining about somebody who just shared in the meeting, or the chairperson, or this person, or that person. I know of people sleeping with people they shouldn't be sleeping with, or doing crime or scamming the system, who actually think they're working their program. Are they measuring themselves by the plumb line? By what instruments should we measure ourselves? Well, here are a few that I've thought of. Two we've already talked about tonight: honesty and humility. What about integrity, which is doing the right thing when nobody's looking? What about compassion? What about caring for ourselves and for others? What about making it a practice not to take anybody's inventory but our own? What about protecting the vulnerable or speaking out against injustice? What about lending a hand without expecting anything in return? What about in our relationship with God? Are we living by the plumb line? What about respect for ourselves, for others, regardless of race, creed, color, gender, religious affiliation? What about making amends whenever necessary? What about listening when somebody's speaking, truly listening and being present for them? Pete, wake up. That was the important part. What about not hurting others, physically or emotionally? What about constantly trying to be a better person, which requires introspection? What about eliminating negative talk from all of our conversations? What about eliminating negative self-talk? What about noticing our negative thoughts towards people, places, and things, and replacing them with positive ones? What about judging less and loving more? How about trying to make a difference in your life, in someone else's life, in your workplace, school, or church, in your community, your city, your province, your country, or yes, even the world? Khalil Gibran wrote, "There are those who give with joy, and that joy is their reward. Try to give more and take less." These are but a few of the suggestions of the ways you can measure and assess your thoughts and actions. Have you ever sat and thought about what things you want to put into place today to make yourself a better person? I encourage you when you leave here to make a list of all your behaviors and your thoughts that you would like to change, and reflect on how you intend to do that. We know that step 10 encourages us to reflect on our day and see where we need to improve. How many of us actually do that? So right now I want you to take a moment and search your heart and ask yourself, have I actually done that every night this week? If you aren't doing it, or you're struggling to reflect daily on your behaviors, just keep it simple and build on it. How are you going to measure yourself? Start by asking yourself these 3 questions. 1, how did I do today? 2, do I truly want to improve? And 3, what can I do to be a better person tomorrow than I was today? My point is in all of this, and I do have one, actually 2, we need to understand the importance of step 5, and that it is a turning point in our sobriety. We can turn the direction of wanting to change old behaviors and move forward, or we can turn the direction of simply doing the step and going back to our old ways. And 2, if we turn the direction of wanting to make positive changes, by which instruments will you measure your new life? How will you set your plumb line?